Night descends upon the desert, and the silence of the dunes is broken only by the wind moving softly across forgotten stones. Above, the heavens blaze with ancient light, constellations shining as they have since the dawn of time. Among the ruins of Sumer, where broken walls and shattered temples lie half-buried, one feels the weight of memory. This land once pulsed with hymns and rituals, a place where humanity first reached toward the gods who ruled the skies. Long before history was carved into tablets, stories were spoken by firelight. Around those flames, people whispered of beings who descended from the heavens, luminous and powerful, rulers who walked among mortals. They were called the Anunnaki, those who came down from the heavens, their name carrying both reverence and awe. To speak it was to summon a memory older than kingdoms, older than written words themselves. The myths tell us that they were not distant figures but present, shaping rivers, granting kingship, demanding worship. The Anunnaki were described as bringers of wisdom, yet also as stern judges, their presence both a blessing and a burden. Who were they? Gods, kings, or visitors from the stars? The ruins hold no clear answer, only fragments, only echoes, leaving us to wonder what truths were once known and later forgotten. Imagine standing among the ruins beneath that vast night sky, the stars shining like eyes that remember everything. The whispers of priests, the chants of kings, the prayers of farmers all seem to linger in the air. In the D, it is as if the desert itself waits for someone to listen, to piece together the fragments of a story that has never been fully silenced. This journey is not about certainty, but about imagination. It is about walking through myths as if they were landscapes, seeing the gods not as distant symbols, but as living presences in the lives of those who built the first cities. To listen to the story of the Anunnaki is to drift between history and dream, to stand where men once believed the heavens touched the earth. If you enjoy traveling through such mysteries, remember to subscribe to this channel, give this film a like, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your support helps keep these stories alive, so together we can continue exploring the echoes of the ancient world. Between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, lies a land that ancient storytellers called the cradle of civilization. Here the soil was dark and fertile, watered by canals that glittered beneath the blazing sun. From this ground rose the first cities, their walls formed from clay baked in heat, their streets filled with sounds of markets and prayers. To stand in this place, even in imagination, is to sense the beginning of everything we know, the foundation upon which kingdoms, laws, and myths were built. The plains stretched outward, vast and shimmering, yet never empty. Farmers bent low to tend their fields, guiding water with careful hands, watching the crops that would feed entire cities. Oxen pulled wooden plows, their hooves sinking into mud, rich with promise. The air carried the scent of damp earth and smoke rising from hearths, where bread baked in round ovens. These were the rhythms of daily life, yet above them all lingered the watchful gaze of the gods, unseen but always present. The first great settlements, like Eridu and Ur, began as clusters of reed huts by riverbanks. Over time they swelled into sprawling cities, each crowned with a temple that rose above the houses like a mountain made by human hands. Priests climbed their steps to perform sacred rites, offering food, wine, and song to those they called the Anunnaki. To the people, these temples were not mere structures, but bridges to the divine, ladders reaching toward unseen realms where decisions of fate were made. Walking through the streets of ancient Ur, one might hear the clamor of merchants selling lapis lazuli from distant lands, or the sharp sound of copper being hammered into tools. Children laughed as they chased each other through narrow alleys while scribes pressed sharp reeds into clay, recording transactions that would outlive their own names. Everything that happened, from the planting of crops to the crowning of kings, unfolded beneath the shadow of gods whose presence was woven into every breath. The rivers themselves were lifelines flowing like serpents through the land. Barges made of reeds and wood glided along the water, their sails billowing gently in desert winds. These boats carried not only goods but ideas, spreading language, belief, and knowledge between distant towns. Yet the rivers were also dangerous, swelling suddenly with floods that could erase villages overnight. To the ancients, these waters were gifts from the gods, but also warnings, reminders of powers greater than men. At dawn, the horizon burned gold as priests raised their hands in ritual chants. They prayed for fertile soil, for protection from storms, for the goodwill of the Anunnaki, who were believed to walk unseen among the people. Smoke spiraled into the sky, carrying words meant to reach distant heavens. Every act of devotion tied the fate of humanity to those mysterious beings who were said to rule both earth and sky. Life in Mesopotamia was never ordinary, for even the simplest labor carried sacred weight. To harvest grain was to fulfill a promise to the gods. To build walls of mud brick was to shape a world that belonged not only to men, but to divine rulers. The hum of daily life was bound with the silence of mystery, as though each heartbeat pulsed to a rhythm set by powers that stood beyond human sight. Among these early cities, kings began to emerge, claiming not just authority but divine sanction. They were seen as caretakers chosen by heaven itself, their power inseparable from the will of the Anunnaki. Rulers did not govern alone. They did so with priests, with rituals, and with symbols carved into tablets that declared laws as sacred decrees. Power was never just political. It was spiritual, grounded in myths as old as the rivers themselves. As cities grew, so too did their legends. Tales spread of beings who once walked openly among men, who guided farmers in the planting of crops, who showed builders how to raise walls strong enough to last centuries. These stories did not fade with time. They became the very foundation of culture, repeated in hymns and carved into stone. The Anunnaki were not distant gods. They were woven into the very birth of civilization itself. In the evenings, when the heat of the day softened, families gathered near their doors, listening to songs sung to the rhythm of drums. The voices carried through streets lit by oil lamps, speaking of the great gods who watched from above. Even the stars seemed to listen, their faint light flickering like eyes that remembered everything. Each word, each note tied the people to an unseen history, one that began long before their own lifetimes. Mesopotamia was a place of order, yet always close to chaos. Droughts could parch the land, plagues could sweep through villages, wars could break upon the walls like storms. In these moments, people looked upward, asking why the Anunnaki allowed such trials. The answer was never clear, for the gods were both generous and harsh, protectors and destroyers. To live in their shadow was to accept both blessing and suffering as part of existence. The scribes of this land became keepers of memory, pressing thousands of signs into clay, each one a fragment of truth, a glimpse into a world shaped by both man and God. Through their hands, myths were preserved, stories of creation, of floods, of kings who ruled by divine command. Without their careful work, the Anunnaki would have been forgotten, their names swallowed by time. Yet because of them, the voices of the past still speak. It was in this land between rivers and under stars that humanity took its first great steps. The sound of chisels carving statues, the sight of towering walls, the murmur of prayers in temples, all of it formed the heartbeat of a civilization unlike any before it. And within this heartbeat, always, was the presence of the Anunnaki. The cradle of civilization was not merely a place of invention and progress, but of awe. It was a stage prepared for stories far greater than men could imagine, stories where sky and earth touched, and where the rulers of heaven shaped the destiny of humankind. This was only the beginning, the first breath before the gods themselves descended. When the ancients spoke of their gods, they did not imagine them as distant figures hidden forever behind clouds. They told of a time when the Anunnaki descended from the heavens, stepping upon the earth with the brilliance of fire and the weight of kings. These tales, preserved in myth and song, speak of moments when the sky opened and mortals trembled before beings whose presence defied all understanding. The descent was remembered in many forms. Some said the gods came in chariots of flame, their wheels blazing like suns as they thundered down from the stars. Others spoke of them appearing upon mountains, shrouded in radiant light, their voices rolling like storms across the valleys. However the story was told, the image remained the same, the Anunnaki arriving not as shadows, but as sovereign rulers, demanding reverence from all who witnessed their glory. Imagine the sight through the eyes of those first witnesses. A shepherd guiding his flock under the stars suddenly sees light falling from the heavens, brighter than any torch, moving with purpose across the sky. The earth shakes as the brilliance descends, and before him stand figures unlike men, yet not entirely foreign. Their forms echo humanity, but their aura is vast, radiant, commanding. To look upon them was to feel both fear and devotion, to know that one's life was no longer one's own. Temples were raised to honor this descent, colossal ziggurats that reached upward like stairways carved for the gods. Priests retold the stories in hymns, voices rising in unison as incense curled into the air. The gods had come, and their arrival was not forgotten. Each ritual, each carved relief on stone walls became a memory preserved for generations, so that the descent would echo long after those who first saw it had turned to dust. The myths describe the Anunnaki not as silent visitors, but as rulers who made their will known. Their words were like thunder, their judgments swift. They divided lands, appointed kings, and established laws that reflected their cosmic order. To mortals, these decrees were not suggestions, but commands carved into the very fabric of existence. It was said that even rivers flowed at their bidding, and storms broke only when they willed it. Yet their presence was not always gentle. Stories tell of men who faltered before them, who could not bear the radiance of their gaze. Entire cities were said to quake when the Anunnaki appeared, as though the ground itself recognized its masters. At times their arrival brought prosperity, fertile fields, overflowing granaries, victories in battle. At other times it carried devastation, as if the gods reminded men that their power could not be questioned. Across the land, symbols of their descent multiplied, wings carved into stone, stars etched above figures of kings, sacred mountains described as thrones of the gods, all spoke of a memory too profound to fade. Even the stars themselves were woven into these tales, as if the heavens were maps of divine journeys, guiding mortals to remember where their rulers had come from. The people did not merely watch, they responded. They built, they sang, they sacrificed. Livestock was laid upon altars, incense poured in endless streams, treasures of gold and silver offered at the feet of colossal statues. Each offering was a plea for favor, a reminder that men understood their place under the dominion of sky-born rulers. And yet, within these stories, there is always a trace of wonder. Did the Anunnaki come as conquerors or as teachers? Were they stern lords demanding obedience, or guides who shared wisdom that allowed cities to rise and flourish? The duality lingers in every hymn, a mystery that could never be fully answered. Even as centuries passed, the memory of their descent did not fade. Farmers whispered it while sowing fields, scribes carved it into clay, kings declared it in their titles. The Anunnaki had come from the heavens, and humanity would never be the same again. Their story was now inseparable from the land itself, tied to the rivers, the temples, the stars above. At night, when fires burned low, storytellers returned to this moment, weaving it with tones both reverent and fearful. The descent was more than history. It was a threshold, a crossing where the human and the divine met face to face. And those who listened felt a shiver, as if the sky itself might open once more. The myths linger not as dry words, but as living echoes, urging us to look upward, to imagine the sudden blaze of light, the trembling of the earth, and the awe that filled the hearts of those who believed they had seen gods walk upon the world. The memory of the descent became the foundation of faith, the justification of kingship, and the heart of every temple ritual. The Anunnaki were not only beings of myth, they were woven into the very identity of civilization. The Anunnaki were not a single voice, but a chorus of divine rulers, each with their own domain, their own temperament, their own struggles. They were a family bound by power, yet fractured by rivalry, their dramas unfolding like those of mortal courts, only magnified by the immensity of their reach. To understand them is to step into a realm where every god was both sovereign and rival, guardian and adversary. At the heart of this pantheon stood Enlil, the stern lord of the skies. His authority was vast, his commands unquestioned. He was seen as the ruler who governed with law and order, who demanded obedience from both mortals and gods. His presence was likened to a storm, sudden and unyielding, bringing both nourishment and destruction. For the people, Enlil embodied the very structure of existence, the relentless will that shaped destiny. Beside him stood Enki, his brother, a figure of wisdom and compassion. Where Enlil ruled with severity, Enki guided with cleverness and care. He was the master of waters, the bringer of knowledge, the one who shared secrets with humanity. To the people he was a friend, a protector, who bent the rules of heaven when mercy was needed. His domain was the deep, the flowing rivers and hidden springs, sources of life that sustained both men and gods. Then came Inanna, radiant and complex, the goddess of love and war, of fertility and destruction. She embodied duality itself, capable of tenderness and ruthless conquest in equal measure. Her power was seen in the rising of the morning star, a celestial fire that disappeared into the underworld only to rise again. Worshippers sang to her with both reverence and fear, for she was not to be ignored. Her presence was passion, beauty, and danger woven together. Each god carried both gift and burden, their actions shaping the lives of mortals. Nin-Hersag, the mother goddess, embodied the fertile earth, blessing fields and mothers alike. Utu, the sun god, was the ever-watchful eye of justice, his rays exposing both good and evil. Nanna, the moon god, marked the passage of time, guiding rituals and seasons. Together they formed a court of rulers, their influence extending to every corner of human life. Yet unity was rare among them. Myths tell of jealousy, of conflicts that shook both heaven and earth. Enlil and Enki clashed, their visions for humanity forever at odds. Inanna pursued power without restraint, her desires pulling her into battles that tested even the authority of her kin. Their quarrels echoed in the affairs of men, for when gods fought, kingdoms trembled. The pantheon was not a collection of abstract forces, but a mirror of human society, elevated to divine scale. The gods quarreled as families do, loved and betrayed, sought vengeance and forgiveness. Their dramas were retold in hymns, not only to honor them, but to explain the mysteries of life. If floods destroyed fields, it was the wrath of Enlil. If wisdom was discovered, it was the gift of Enki. Every triumph and disaster found its root in the struggles of the Anunnaki. Temples rose as palaces for these lords, each one dedicated to a god's unique power. Within their walls, priests performed endless rituals, chanting hymns that retold the victories and sorrows of their divine patrons. To worship was not only devotion, but also participation in the cosmic drama, aligning human life with the eternal struggles of heaven. Even kings measured themselves against these gods. A ruler was strong only if he held the favor of Enlil, wise only if Enki granted him insight, victorious only if Inanna stood by his side in battle. To lose divine favor was to risk the collapse of a kingdom, for no throne was secure without the blessing of heaven. The rivalries among the Anunnaki gave shape to a mythology that was as much about conflict as it was about creation. Their struggles taught lessons of power and ambition, of mercy and cruelty. They were reminders that divinity did not mean perfection, but the magnification of every human trait into something vast, eternal, and dangerous. Even as the centuries passed, the stories of these lords endured, not as simple tales, but as profound reflections of human existence. They revealed a truth understood by the ancients, that the heavens were not silent, but alive with voices that shaped destiny, voices that loved and hated, that built and destroyed. The Anunnaki were remembered not only as rulers of men, but as reflections of human nature itself, exalted to cosmic scale. Their family drama was written into the stars, their rivalries etched into the rise and fall of empires. To speak their names was to recall both the grandeur of heaven and the fragility of earth. The stories of Enlil, Enki, Inanna, and their kin did not fade because they carried something eternal. They spoke of power and struggle, of wisdom and folly, of the endless dance between order and chaos. And in their memory, humanity continued to look upward, wondering if the heavens still held the lords who once walked upon the earth. Among the many mysteries that surround the Anunnaki, none is more compelling than their hunger for gold. Ancient myths speak of these sky-born rulers desiring the shining metal not as ornament, nor as wealth, but as something vital, something that bound them to their distant home among the stars. To the ancients, gold was eternal, never tarnishing, always gleaming as though it contained a fragment of the sun itself. This brilliance became more than treasure. It became a bridge between earth and heaven. Legends whisper that the Anunnaki commanded men to mine rivers and mountains, to dig deep into the earth where veins of gold lay hidden. Laborers toiled beneath the heat of desert suns, their bodies bent and weary, yet their work carried a sacred purpose. Each nugget pulled from the ground was not merely metal, but an offering, a gift destined for the hands of gods. The mines echoed with the sound of hammers striking stone, the cries of men who believed they were serving a will beyond their own. Gold, unlike other metals, never rusted. It gleamed as it did on the day it was unearthed, a quality that marked it as eternal. To the Anunnaki, this incorruptibility may have been its greatest value. Some myths hint that they required it for survival, that their distant world depended upon it in ways humanity could not fathom. Others saw it as a symbol, a way to bind their dominion on earth with the eternal brilliance of the cosmos. In temples, statues of gods were overlaid with sheets of gold, their eyes gleaming with gemstones, their forms radiant as though alive with divine fire. Altars shimmered with golden vessels, each one filled with offerings of wine, milk, or honey. To approach these sanctuaries was to step into a space where light seemed to breathe, where the presence of the gods was not abstract, but almost tangible, in the glow of gold. Priests guarded these treasures with devotion, yet they too wondered at their meaning. Why did the gods require such abundance of a metal men could not eat, nor drink, nor shape into tools of war? What secret need lay hidden within their desire? Songs preserved in fragments suggest that the Anunnaki took this wealth not merely as tribute, but as sustenance, as though the very fabric of their existence was tied to the eternal radiance of gold. Imagine miners in distant hills digging tunnels that stretched like veins beneath the surface. Their torches flickered, shadows danced upon stone walls, sweat dripped as they lifted baskets heavy with ore. Every stroke of the pick echoed like a prayer, a reminder that their labor was part of a cosmic design. They may not have understood the reasons, yet they believed they were serving powers whose command could not be questioned. The rivers too were searched, men wading waist-deep, swirling pans through muddy waters until golden flecks shone in the light. Each grain was cherished, gathered carefully, carried back to temples where priests purified it with fire. This process itself was ritual, a transformation that mirrored myths of birth and death, of creation drawn from the chaos of the earth. Stories spread that the Anunnaki required gold not only for themselves, but for their homeland, a realm beyond the stars where its brilliance could shield and preserve their world. To the people of Sumer, such claims were not strange, for the heavens were alive with mysteries. If the gods had descended from above, then surely their needs were not of earth alone. Gold became more than metal. It became destiny. Kings hoarded it, temples displayed it, common men dreamt of finding even a fragment to bring favor from the divine. It was woven into hymns, described as the flesh of the gods, the very material of their immortality. In this way, gold became the ultimate symbol of the bond between heaven and earth. Yet questions lingered. Was the hunger for gold truly physical, or was it spiritual? Was it substance or symbol? Did the Anunnaki crave it as a necessity for survival, or as a reminder of their celestial origin? The stories do not answer, leaving only the shimmering mystery of a metal that gleams like the sun, eternal and unchanging. Across empires, echoes of this golden pursuit appear. Egypt crowned its pharaohs with golden masks. Peru's temples gleamed with sheets of hammered gold. India described the metal as the seed of the gods. Could all these traditions be shadows of the same memory, a whisper carried across continents of a time when the rulers of the skies demanded gold from mankind? For the miners, the priests, and the kings, gold was more than treasure. It was covenant, duty, and sacrifice. To hold it was to hold a fragment of the divine. To release it was to honor the unseen bond with rulers who came from the heavens. The story of gold was not one of greed, but of mystery, shimmering forever in the light of forgotten ages. Among the oldest stories carved into clay is the tale of how humanity came to be, not born of chance, but crafted by the hands of gods. The Anunnaki, it is said, shaped mankind as potters shape clay, molding fragile figures from earth and breathing into them a spark that was not entirely mortal. This story lingers in fragments of tablets, in chants, whispered in temples, in the silent awe of those who believed their very flesh was made with divine intent. The myths tell of gods weary with labor, tired of digging, of building, of working the land. They turned to Enki, wise and compassionate, asking for a solution. It was he who proposed the creation of a new race, a people who would take on the burdens of toil, freeing the gods to rule and dream. This idea carried both generosity and cruelty, for humanity would be given life but also bound to serve. Imagine the chamber where this act unfolded, half temple, half workshop. the air thick with incense, the ground covered with vessels and clay, priests retelling the vision of how the first man was shaped. Hands of divine power pressed mud into form, water mixing with earth until limbs and faces appeared. Yet clay alone was not enough. Into the mixture was poured the essence of gods themselves, blood or spirit, something eternal mingling with mortal flesh. The result was man, fragile yet enduring, bound to earth yet touched by heaven. This mixture gave humanity its dual nature, the body destined for decay, the spirit reaching for eternity. To the ancients, this explained why men could dream of the stars while still being tied to the dust beneath their feet. It was a paradox that defined existence, both servant and seeker. In hymns, mankind is described as the crown of creation, yet also as the workers of the fields. The gods shaped us not for freedom, but for necessity. Our hands built temples, our backs carried burdens, our songs honored those who gave us life. Yet within us also burned a spark the gods could not entirely control, a restless yearning that no chains of service could silence. The myths describe creation as both gift and curse. Some tell of joy among the gods who celebrated their new companions. Others hint at regret, at fear that men might grow too clever, too ambitious, too much like their makers. This tension lies at the heart of the story, for creation was not simple, it was fraught with questions that echo even now. Enki, in his wisdom, is often portrayed as protector of humanity, whispering secrets that helped men survive. Enlil, stern and unyielding, viewed mankind with suspicion, seeing in us not servants, but potential rivals. Their conflict framed the destiny of man, torn between compassion and control, between freedom and subjugation. In temples, rituals retold the story of creation, reminding men of their origin. Clay figurines were molded, prayers whispered, sacrifices offered. Each act was both thanksgiving and reminder that humanity owed its very being to the will of the gods. Yet within these ceremonies lay a quiet defiance. For to remember creation was also to remember the spark within, the fragment of divinity that could never be erased. Imagine the awe of those first generations who believed they lived in the shadow of their makers. To see the gods walk among them, to serve in their fields, to labor at their command, it was not only duty, but destiny. Yet perhaps in quiet moments, they looked at their hands, their breath, their dreams, and wondered if they were more than what they had been made to be. The creation of man became the foundation of countless myths across the world. From clay figures shaped by divine hands to sparks of heavenly fire placed in mortal shells, echoes of this story appear in cultures far beyond Mesopotamia. Each retelling carries the same haunting idea, that humanity is not an accident, but a creation with purpose, bound forever to powers beyond itself. For the Sumerians, this story explained not only their origin, but their role. Men existed to serve, to build, to worship. Yet by serving, they also became part of the cosmic order, threads woven into a design that spanned earth and sky alike. In this balance lay the meaning of their existence. The story of creation also carried warning. To forget the gods, to rebel against them, was to deny the very essence of one's being, yet to accept blindly was to live only as servant. The tension between these two truths defined the ancient world, as it continues to define humanity even now. The clay from which men were shaped crumbles with time, yet the spark within remains. It whispers in dreams, in questions that rise when we look at the stars. Were we made only to serve, or to rise beyond the purpose given to us? The story does not answer. It only leaves us with the haunting memory of gods shaping clay, breathing life, and stepping back to watch what mankind would become. The Anunnaki were not only rulers, They were teachers. They gave mankind gifts that transformed the world. The knowledge of irrigation, the secrets of planting, the art of writing, the patterns of stars traced across the night sky. These gifts lifted humanity from survival into civilization, guiding men to build, to organize, to dream. Yet among their teachings were whispers of knowledge too dangerous, secrets locked away, forbidden even to those who served faithfully. The myths speak of wisdom shared in measured portions, as though the gods feared what might happen if men learned too much. Writing, for instance, was granted to scribes and priests, not to common men. The stars were studied by chosen watchers, their patterns guarded within temple walls. Even medicine and law were preserved in sacred schools, where only a few could enter. Knowledge was never free. It was a gift, tightly bound in ritual and hierarchy. Imagine the ziggurats, their colossal steps rising into the sky. Within their chambers, priests whispered incantations, copied tablets, studied the heavens. They spoke of things hidden from the masses, the cycles of the moon, the mathematics of canals, the prophecies written in eclipses. These were not only sciences, but sacred mysteries, entrusted only to those who carried divine authority. The idea of forbidden knowledge carries both fascination and fear. Myths describe how some mortals sought to learn what was denied to them, reaching beyond their place. These stories rarely end well. Punishment followed curiosity, as though the gods feared that once men tasted full wisdom, they would no longer accept their role as servants. Yet the Anunnaki were not without contradiction. They gave humanity fire, the plough, the wheel, even the ability to carve their names into eternity through writing. These gifts changed everything, reshaping the very fabric of society. At the same time, they withheld the greater mysteries, the secrets of creation, of life and death, of the stars from which they themselves had come. It was a balance between generosity and control, a careful measure of what could be shared and what must remain hidden. The stars themselves became the greatest mystery. Priests who studied them spoke of patterns that revealed the will of the gods, of movements that foretold harvests, floods, and even wars. Yet among these patterns some signs were concealed, knowledge too profound to pass into mortal hands. To gaze too deeply at the sky was to risk madness, for the heavens held truths not meant for men. In stories, whispers of forbidden knowledge surface again and again, a hero who dares to ask questions denied, a priest who learns secrets in a dream, a king who demands to know the mysteries of the gods. Their tales remind us that knowledge is both light and fire, illuminating but also burning those who grasp too much. The ancients imagined hidden schools within temples, chambers closed to the world, where chosen few were taught what others could not even speak aloud. In these secret halls, knowledge was passed like sacred flame, never written plainly, always veiled in symbols. To be chosen was an honor, but also a burden, for to carry forbidden wisdom was to walk on the edge between reverence and danger. The myths suggest that even the gods disagreed. Enki, the giver of wisdom, often shared freely, guiding men in defiance of stricter lords like Enlil. This conflict echoes the eternal struggle between mercy and authority, between those who believe knowledge should be spread and those who believe it must be controlled. Humanity, caught in the middle, received fragments of both generosity and restraint. Through time, the memory of forbidden knowledge grew into legend. Alchemists, magicians, and seekers in later ages claimed they pursued the same hidden truths passed down from the first teachers among the Anunnaki. Whether these claims were real or imagined, they reveal the enduring allure of secrets that promise power, wisdom, or even immortality. Knowledge became a treasure more valuable than gold, more enduring than kingship. To possess it was to touch the divine, To wield it unwisely was to risk destruction. The ancients understood this paradox well, for their myths remind us again and again that wisdom is both gift and danger, blessing and curse. And so humanity walked a path guided by both light and shadow. The teachings of the Anunnaki gave rise to civilization, yet always with the warning that some doors must remain closed. To open them was to invite consequences too great for men to bear. Even now the idea lingers that somewhere in forgotten ruins or buried tablets, fragments of forbidden knowledge wait to be found. The thought stirs both curiosity and caution, for to uncover what the gods once withheld is to step into mysteries that may change humanity forever. The story of forbidden knowledge is not one of answers, but of questions that echo through time. What did the Anunnaki hide? What truths lie beyond the veil? And if those truths were revealed, would humanity rise higher or be consumed by the fire of wisdom too bright to endure? The ancients believed that rulership itself did not rise from the soil of the earth, but descended from the sky. In the Sumerian king list, a curious phrase is written with solemn reverence: "Kingship descended from heaven." This was no metaphor to those who carved the words into clay. It was a literal declaration that the order of human rule was not born of men, but granted from the Anunnaki. Imagine the scene of a coronation in ancient Mesopotamia. The city gathers, drums thunder, incense burns in thick spirals toward the sky. The ruler kneels before the high priest, who speaks the names of the gods. Crowns of gold and lapis are placed upon his head, not as ornaments, but as symbols of divine approval. The people do not see merely a man, they see a reflection of heavenly order, a bridge between mortal life and the will of the Anunnaki. The king list preserves names that stretch back into a time so distant it almost vanishes into myth. Some reigns are said to last hundreds, even thousands of years, as though these early rulers were not entirely mortal. These figures walk the line between man and God, their lifespans echoing the eternal nature of their celestial patrons. To recite their names is to recite a lineage that binds heaven and earth together. Kingship was not only power, but responsibility. A ruler was expected to uphold justice, protect the weak, and offer sacrifices on behalf of his people. Yet his authority was always seen as borrowed, granted from above and capable of being withdrawn. If a king faltered, if he lost the favor of the Anunnaki, his city might crumble, his throne might be taken by another. In this belief lay the fragility of power balanced on the unseen will of the heavens. The throne itself was treated as sacred. It was not merely a seat of governance, but a cosmic symbol mirroring the thrones of the gods. To sit upon it was to bear the weight of divine destiny, to speak not only as a man, but as one chosen by forces far greater. Every decision was judged not only by subjects, but by the Anunnaki themselves. Cities competed for the honor of kingship. At times, it was believed that the right to rule moved from one city to another, carried like a sacred flame by the will of the gods. When kingship shifted, temples were rebuilt, laws rewritten, rituals renewed. The entire rhythm of society changed, for it was not human conquest that mattered most, but divine decree. The king was often described as the shepherd of his people, guiding them under the watchful eyes of the gods. Yet this shepherd was not gentle alone. He led armies, defended walls, demanded tribute. His strength was proof of divine favor, his victories evidence that the Anunnaki walked beside him on the battlefield. Defeat, by contrast, was seen as the withdrawal of that heavenly support. Priests played a vital role in affirming this divine kingship. They recited ancient hymns that declared the ruler's legitimacy, reminding the people that their king was no mere mortal, but the chosen vessel of the heavens. Rituals of renewal bound the monarch's reign to cycles of fertility, ensuring that the land, the rivers, and the people remained in harmony with the will of the gods. The myth of kingship carried weight beyond Mesopotamia. Later cultures echoed it in their own ways. Pharaohs of Egypt claimed descent from the sun god Ra. Chinese emperors ruled by the mandate of heaven. Medieval kings crowned themselves as rulers by the grace of God. All of these beliefs may be traced back to the same ancient conviction that true sovereignty is a gift not of man, but of the stars. For the Sumerians, this idea was more than tradition. It was survival. A kingdom stood firm only so long as it aligned with the divine order. To rebel against a king was not only treason, but blasphemy, a challenge not only to human law, but to the will of the Anunnaki themselves. Yet beneath this reverence lay unease. If kingship came from heaven, what of those who abused it? Could the gods err in their choice? Or was tyranny itself part of some greater plan hidden from human eyes? Such questions lingered in hushed whispers, never spoken aloud in temples, but always present in the hearts of those who suffered under unjust rulers. The king list ends not with certainty, but with silence. Dynasties rise and fall, reigns stretch from myth into history, and always the refrain returns: kingship descended from heaven. This belief formed the backbone of civilization, reminding humanity that their leaders carried more than mortal weight. Through the smoke of rituals and the songs of priests, the people gazed upon their rulers and saw the reflection of stars. Kingship, they believed, was eternal, as ancient as the Anunnaki who first walked the earth. And in this belief, men built kingdoms that still echo through the ruins today. In the heart of Mesopotamia rose a city unlike any other, a place whose name still whispers through time: Uruk. To the ancients, it was not merely a settlement of walls and streets, but a jewel of civilization, shimmering with power and legend. To walk within its gates was to enter a world where humanity and divinity mingled, where every stone bore witness to the presence of the gods. The walls of Uruk stretched outward for miles, immense barriers of mud brick that encircled the city like the embrace of giants. Ancient writers claimed they were so vast that a man could walk their length for days without seeing their end. To stand upon those walls was to look across a landscape of bustling life, canals glistening like silver threads, and fields stretching toward the horizon. Within these walls, temples rose like mountains crafted by human hands. The Eanna temple, dedicated to Inanna, gleamed as the heart of the city. Here, worshippers carried offerings of food and precious metals, songs filled the air, and rituals unfolded that connected the people of Uruk to their goddess. The temple was more than a building. It was a living presence, a reminder that Inanna herself walked with her people. Markets thrived in the shadow of these temples. Merchants sold copper tools, pottery, textiles dyed in vibrant colors. The scent of bread fresh from clay ovens mingled with the smoke of roasting meats. Voices rose in bargaining, laughter, and song. Uruk was alive with sound and movement, a center not only of faith, but of trade, art, and culture. Uruk was also the city of Gilgamesh, a king whose deeds became immortal in epic poetry. His story, carved into clay tablets, tells of a ruler who sought wisdom, immortality, and truth. Whether or not every word of the epic is literal, the memory of Gilgamesh reflects the grandeur of his city, a place where human ambition reached for the eternal. The streets of Uruk carried a sense of duality. On one side, the daily bustle of labor, trade, and celebration. On the other, the solemn silence of rituals, prayers, and sacrifices. Together they formed a rhythm that defined the city, binding practical life to spiritual destiny. To live in Uruk was to live in constant awareness that the gods walked unseen among the people. Water flowed through the city in canals that branched from the great Euphrates. These waterways nourished crops, filled cisterns, and carried boats laden with goods. They also reflected the stars at night, shimmering mirrors of the heavens above. To the people of Uruk, the city itself seemed a reflection of cosmic order, a place where the divine and the mortal converged. Inanna's presence was felt in every aspect of life. Festivals in her honor filled the streets with music and dance. Priests and priestesses reenacted sacred dramas, and kings declared themselves chosen by her favor. Her dual nature, love and war, creation and destruction, became the soul of the city itself, a city both fertile and fierce, both tender and unyielding. Art and writing flourished within Uruk's walls. Scribes pressed symbols into clay, preserving laws, trade records, and hymns. Sculptors carved figures of gods and kings, their eyes wide with eternal gaze. Every act of creation in Uruk was both practical and sacred, a testament to the belief that the Anunnaki had given humanity the power to shape the world. At night, the city glowed with lamplight. Families gathered on rooftops beneath the stars, sharing stories, singing songs, watching constellations drift overhead. The walls of Uruk seemed to merge with the sky itself, as if the city were an earthly echo of celestial realms. In these moments, the boundary between earth and heaven blurred, and the people felt themselves part of something vast and eternal. Travelers from distant lands spoke of Uruk with awe. They marveled at its walls, its temples, its markets, its sheer size and splendor. To them, Uruk was not just a city, but a wonder, proof that humanity, guided by the gods, could create something lasting, something that touched eternity. Uruk became a symbol of civilization itself, a place where myth and history intertwined. It was remembered not only as a seat of kingship, but as a city where the divine pulse of the Anunnaki could still be felt in every brick, every song, every star reflected in its canals. Though centuries passed and empires rose and fell, the memory of Uruk endured. Its name lived on in stories, its walls in poetry, its temples in fragments of ruins. To speak of Uruk was to speak of the dawn of greatness, of a city where humanity first reached toward the stars. The city's story reminds us that civilization is not only stone and mortar, but spirit. Uruk was more than a place, it was a dream given form, a reflection of gods and men bound together in the endless dance of creation. Among the most haunting tales preserved on ancient tablets is the story of a great flood, a deluge that swept across the earth and washed away the works of men. To the Sumerians, this flood was no mere storm, but a judgment from the gods, a reset that erased the old world so that life could begin anew. It was a story of destruction, survival, and fragile hope whispered across generations. The myth tells of Ziusudra, a man chosen by the gods to endure what others could not. He was warned of the coming waters, instructed to build a vessel strong enough to withstand the endless rains. With trembling hands, he gathered wood, sealed planks with pitch, and shaped a refuge for his family, his animals, and the seeds of life itself. When the skies opened, they did not relent. Rains fell in torrents, rivers swelled with fury, and winds howled across the land. Villages vanished beneath waves, temples crumbled, fields dissolved into oceans. To those who lived through it, the world itself seemed to dissolve, leaving only chaos where order had once been. Imagine the sound of it, the endless pounding of rain against wood, the roar of waters rising higher and higher, the cries of those who clung to rooftops only to be swept away. The flood was not just water, it was the wrath of heaven, the cleansing force of gods who had grown weary of mankind. Yet amid this destruction, Ziusudra endured. His vessel rose with the waters, drifting across a world drowned in silence. He carried with him not only life but memory, the hope that when the waters subsided, the earth would be renewed. His survival became the thread that tied the old world to the new. When the flood receded, Ziusudra stepped onto land and offered sacrifice to the gods. Smoke rose into the sky, a sign of gratitude, of covenant, of continuity. The Anunnaki, moved by his devotion, granted him favor, allowing humanity to endure despite their judgment. His story was carved into clay, preserved as a warning and a promise. The flood myth did not belong to Sumer alone. Echoes of it ripple across cultures. In the Hebrew story of Noah, the Greek tale of Deucalion, the Indian story of Manu, each retelling carries the same haunting theme: gods cleansing the earth with water, sparing only a chosen few. These parallels suggest not mere coincidence, but memory shared across ages, as if humanity itself still carries the scar of that deluge. The flood represents both destruction and renewal. To wash away was to erase sins, errors, failures, but also to give humanity a new beginning. The survivors became the roots of all that followed, carrying the weight of both loss and hope. In this duality lies the power of the story, reminding us that endings are also beginnings, that even ruin can give birth to creation. For the people of Mesopotamia, the flood explained the fragility of life. No city, no king, no temple was safe from the will of the gods. In an instant, all could be swept away. Yet the story also carried reassurance that life could endure, that the bond between gods and men could be restored through faith and devotion. Temples retold the flood in ritual, priests chanting of waters that erased and fires that renewed. Families whispered it at night, warning their children of the wrath of heaven, but also of the mercy that followed. It became not only a story of the past, but a lesson for the present. Respect the gods, remember their power, and honor the fragile gift of survival. The flood also marked a boundary in memory. What came before it seemed distant, mythic, almost unreal. What followed carried the weight of history, of new dynasties, new laws, new order. The deluge was the hinge upon which ages turned, dividing the forgotten from the remembered. Even today, when the rains fall heavy and rivers swell, the ancient fear returns. Somewhere deep within the human spirit lies the memory of waters rising without end, of a world erased in silence. The story of the flood is more than myth. It is a reminder of nature's power, of destiny's weight, and of the fragile thread upon which all life depends. The great flood did not silence humanity, but it did change it. It left a scar upon memory, a reminder carved into tablets, sung in hymns, carried in whispers across the world. And from that scar grew new civilizations, rising from the mud of a world reborn. Among the Anunnaki, few tales burn brighter than the rivalry between two brothers, Enlil and Enki. Their names echo through hymns and myths, their struggle remembered as one of the great dramas of the ancient world. They were kin, yet opposites, bound by blood, yet divided by vision. The story of their rivalry is not only a tale of gods, but a reflection of humanity's own struggle between law and mercy, control and freedom. Enlil, stern and unyielding, was the lord of authority. His voice was thunder, his will iron. He ruled with absolute order, demanding obedience not only from mortals, but from gods themselves. To him, humanity was fragile and reckless, in need of discipline and boundaries. His laws were not gentle, but firm, like the floodwaters that both nurtured and destroyed. Enki, by contrast, was the bringer of wisdom, the lord of water and knowledge. Where Enlil punished, Enki guided. He was the patron of invention, the whisperer of secret, the one who offered humanity the tools to survive. His compassion set him apart, for he saw in mankind not just servants but companions, beings capable of growth and learning. Their conflict began with purpose, for both believed they were shaping the destiny of the world. Enlil sought order through control, Enki sought harmony through understanding. Yet their visions clashed again and again, and in their disputes, cities rose and fell, destinies shifted like sand in the desert wind. The flood myth itself carries their rivalry. Some stories say Enlil sought to erase humanity with waters of judgment, while Enki secretly warned Ziusudra, guiding him to build a vessel of survival. In this defiance, Enki preserved humanity against his brother's will. This act defined him not only as a god of wisdom, but as a protector of mankind, willing to stand against divine decree for the sake of compassion. Temples reflected their dual presence. Enlil's ziggurats towered as monuments of law and authority, vast and immovable. Enki's sanctuaries by rivers and springs echoed with water's gentle song, places of healing and learning. To walk from one to the other was to step between two visions of the world, two currents pulling humanity in different directions. The rivalry was not only divine but cosmic. In their quarrels one sees the eternal balance of opposites, storm and river, command and counsel, judgment and mercy. Their tension shaped myths not as simple stories, but as explanations for the very forces that govern life. Yet beneath their struggle lay kinship. They were brothers, bound by the same origin, children of the same cosmic lineage. Their rivalry was not born of hatred alone, but of difference, of visions too vast to be reconciled. In this complexity they became more than gods. They became mirrors of human families, where love and strife often walked together. Priests retold their stories not only to honor the gods, but to teach. To follow Enlil was to respect law and order, to recognize the power of discipline. To follow Enki was to seek wisdom, compassion, and ingenuity. Together the brothers offered a choice, a path that was never simple, but always meaningful. Kings often claimed the favor of one or the other. A stern ruler would invoke Enlil's authority, declaring his throne as the embodiment of law. A wise and cunning king might call upon Enki, presenting himself as the protector of knowledge and prosperity. In this way, the rivalry of brothers shaped not only myth but politics, guiding the destiny of empires. Even in later ages, echoes of their conflict remained. The stern god of judgment and the merciful guide appear in countless traditions. Their names changed, their faces altered, but their essence enduring. The duality they embodied became part of humanity's eternal story. The rivalry between Enlil and Enki was never resolved. It lived in the hearts of men and in the balance of the world itself. Storms still clash with rivers, justice still wrestles with mercy, order still struggles against freedom. In this struggle lies the pulse of existence, the rhythm of life shaped by two brothers who could never truly agree. Their story lingers in silence and in song, reminding us that the world is not simple, but bound by opposites. To live is to walk between Enlil and Enki, between law and wisdom, between the stern voice of the heavens and the gentle whisper of the waters. Among the Anunnaki, one figure shines brighter than most, radiant yet unpredictable, loved yet feared. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, fertility and destruction, embodied the brilliance of the morning star. To worship her was to embrace both passion and peril, for she carried within her the duality of creation and ruin. Her story is one of light and shadow, of descent and return, of the endless cycle written into the heavens. Inanna was beauty made divine, yet she was no gentle goddess alone. Her temples echoed with hymns of love, of union, of fertility, yet also with cries of warriors invoking her before battle. She was both nurturer and destroyer, mother and conqueror. To her followers she was irresistible, a force of nature as necessary as the sun, as dangerous as the storm. The most haunting tale of Inanna speaks of her descent into the underworld. She journeyed through 7 gates, shedding her garments at each, until she stood naked and vulnerable before the Queen of the Dead. In that silent realm, her power vanished, and she was struck down, hung upon a hook like a lifeless shadow. For days, the world above mourned, crops withered, animals grew restless, lovers felt the absence of desire itself. Yet Inanna did not remain below. Through cunning and intervention she was restored, rising again from the depths of darkness. Her return was celebrated as renewal, a cycle of death and rebirth, echoing the path of the morning star that disappears from the sky only to rise again in brilliance. To the ancients, this story was not only myth, but truth woven into the heavens, a cosmic drama enacted each night and dawn. Her dual nature gave her power unlike any other. Inanna was the goddess of lovers who offered flowers at her altars, and of soldiers who painted her star upon their shields. Her presence was invoked at weddings and at battles, at births and at funerals. She was life in its fullness, joy and grief, tenderness and violence intertwined. Temples dedicated to her were centers of both celebration and mystery. Priestesses sang her praises in hymns that spoke of passion and ecstasy, while rituals of sacred marriage symbolized her union with kings, binding the land itself to her favor. To worship Inanna was to surrender to the intensity of existence, to embrace the beauty and danger of life without restraint. Her star, bright and unyielding, guided travelers and inspired poets. When it appeared at dawn, it was her radiant face shining upon the world. When it faded into the underworld, it was her absence that chilled the hearts of men. Inanna was the rhythm of the cosmos itself, her story written across the sky. Yet she was not without shadow. Myths tell of her wrath, of vengeance upon those who denied her worship, of cities laid low by her fury. Her passion, when spurned, became a fire that consumed all. This duality was her essence, love that gave life, war that destroyed it, light that could also burn. Kings sought her favor above all. To claim Inanna's blessing was to claim power beyond mortal reach. They called themselves her chosen, her lovers, her companions in divine union. Yet to lose her favor was to invite ruin, for her love was fierce but never guaranteed. Inanna's story reflects the cycle of existence itself. We rise, we fall, we descend into darkness, and we return renewed. Her myth is not distant but intimate, touching the deepest experiences of human life. Love, grief, longing, triumph, all belong to her. Her presence has echoed through time, transforming into new names, new faces. In Greece, she became Aphrodite. In Rome, Venus. Yet beneath each transformation lay the same star, the same goddess of brilliance and duality. Her light has never faded, only shifted through the lens of cultures. Inanna remains eternal, not because she is perfect, but because she embodies contradiction. She is the star that both guides and blinds, the goddess who gives and takes, the eternal rhythm of life and death written across the cosmos. To remember her is to remember that love and war, joy and sorrow, creation and destruction are not separate, but bound together in the story of existence. Without clay, the voices of the Anunnaki might have been lost forever. It was in the wet earth of Mesopotamia that humanity first pressed signs with sharpened reeds, carving symbols that captured thought and memory. From these fragile tablets came the preservation of myths, laws, hymns, and stories, a library of eternity baked into the most humble of materials. Scribes worked by lamplight, their tools simple, their task immense. Each stroke pressed into clay was deliberate, each sign a fragment of meaning. They recorded not only trade and taxes, but also the great myths of gods and men. Without them, the tales of Enki and Enlil, of Inanna and Gilgamesh, might have dissolved into silence. With them, the voices of ancient priests still whisper across millennia. The clay tablets were both fragile and enduring. A single drop could break them, yet buried beneath the sands they survived thousands of years, waiting to be uncovered. They were like seeds of memory, dormant until scholars unearthed them, bringing back stories thought long forgotten. In these tablets lie the earliest hymns to the Anunnaki, written in cuneiform signs that resemble stars pressed into earth. Each line carries rhythm and reverence, songs of devotion to rulers who came from the heavens. Through them, we glimpse the awe of a civilization that believed its fate was woven with the divine. The scribes themselves were guardians of this wisdom. They trained for years, memorizing signs, learning the sacred order of writing. To become a scribe was not only to gain skill, but to step into a role of spiritual significance. They were keepers of memory, servants of both king and god, chosen to preserve the truths of heaven and earth. Imagine the quiet of their workrooms, shelves of tablets, the glow of lamps, the scratching of reeds against damp clay. Outside, markets bustled and temples rang with hymns, but within those chambers time slowed and eternity was pressed into form, one symbol at a time. The secrets written in clay were not always open. Some tablets were meant only for priests, others only for kings. Wisdom was recorded but veiled, hidden in symbols and metaphors. To read them was to unlock doors into mysteries of creation, of floods, of laws given by the gods themselves. Among the most treasured tablets were those that recorded the king list, the epic of Gilgamesh, and the tales of the flood. Each was more than story, each was a bridge to the divine. To read them aloud was to reawaken voices that still carried authority, still demanded reverence. Clay preserved not only myths but the rhythm of daily life, recipes for bread, records of livestock, contracts of marriage. All were pressed into earth alongside the stories of gods. In this way, the sacred and the mundane became inseparable, just as they were in the lives of the people. When archaeologists uncovered these tablets, they opened windows into a forgotten world. Symbols once silent spoke again, telling us of beliefs, fears, and hopes that had survived the fall of empires. Through them, the Anunnaki's presence re-emerged, carried by the very clay that had once formed humanity itself. The clay tablets remind us that memory can be fragile yet enduring. They are fragments of a civilization that refused to let its voice vanish, seeds of truth planted in earth and preserved by time. They prove that even the humblest material can carry the weight of eternity. Each tablet is a whisper from the past, each sign a heartbeat across millennia. Through them we hear again the songs of temples, the prayers of kings, the myths of gods who came from the heavens. Secrets written in clay do not fade. They endure, waiting for hands to lift them from the dust, for eyes to trace their lines, for voices to speak their truths once more. And in those truths the Anunnaki live again, their story forever preserved in the simplest of elements, earth shaped by human hands. Across the plains of Mesopotamia, colossal structures rose above the horizon, their stair-like forms reaching toward the sky. These were the ziggurats, temples not merely of worship, but of connection, places where heaven and earth touched. To those who built them, these towers were more than stone and clay. They were machines of the cosmos, instruments that aligned mortal life with divine order. Each level of the ziggurat was a step closer to the heavens, a bridge of bricks leading upward to the realm of the Anunnaki. Priests ascended slowly, chanting hymns with each step, their voices carried by the wind. From the ground, the people gazed upward, their eyes following the figures who climbed into the clouds. To them, the ascent was more than ritual. It was the reenactment of a journey toward the gods themselves. The temples were built with precision, often aligned to the movements of the stars, the sun, and the moon. Their foundations faced cardinal directions, their corners pointed toward celestial events. Each brick carried not only physical weight but symbolic meaning, for the temple was a map of the universe, a reflection of the cosmic order. To step inside was to enter a miniature version of creation, a sacred model of the heavens. Imagine the temple at night, torches burning along its steps, the sky glittering above with endless constellations. Priests stood at the summit, watching the heavens, marking the passage of stars, tracing patterns that guided the fate of kings and empires. The ziggurat became both sanctuary and observatory, a place where divine messages were read in the language of light. Within their chambers, rituals unfolded with care and mystery. Incense filled the air, drums beat in steady rhythm, voices recited hymns carved long ago into clay. Offerings of food, wine, and gold were placed before statues of gods whose presence was believed to inhabit the temple itself. To enter these spaces was to step into the threshold of another world where the boundary between mortal and divine blurred. The temples were not only religious centers but also engines of society. From them radiated laws, festivals, and the rhythms of daily life. Priests managed the distribution of grain, the organization of workers, the records of trade. In this way, the ziggurat was the heart of the city, both spiritual and practical, a machine that ordered not only the cosmos but human existence. Yet the people believed the true purpose of these temples was communion. The gods had descended once, and the ziggurat stood as their landing places, stairways prepared for their return. Each step, each chamber, each offering was designed to invite the Anunnaki back into the world of men. The temples were not passive shrines, but active instruments, built to draw heaven downward. Myths describe the gods resting in the chambers of these sacred towers, their presence manifest in fire, in light, in voices that shook the walls. To the worshippers, the ziggurat was not empty stone, but alive with divinity, a machine that summoned the unseen into the seen. The sheer labor of building such structures was itself an act of devotion. Thousands of workers shaped mud bricks, carried them in endless lines, stacked them into forms that reached toward the sky. Their sweat and toil were offerings, their labor part of the ritual. Each stone was both prayer and sacrifice, binding men and gods together in creation. Stories whispered that the temples were more than symbolic. Some claimed they were tuned to the energies of the earth, that their design captured the pulse of the land and transmitted it upward to the stars. Others believed they were portals, places where the Anunnaki could descend more easily, as though the temples vibrated in harmony with celestial realms. To climb a ziggurat was to enact a cosmic journey. Each level represented a stage of existence, the earth below, the sky above, the divine at the summit. By ascending, priests symbolically crossed through realms, bringing offerings from humanity to the gods and returning with blessings. The temple was the axis of the universe, the ladder between mortality and eternity. Even today, the ruins of ziggurats still rise from the sands, silent yet commanding. Though their altars lie empty and their rituals have ceased, their shapes still speak. They remind us that ancient people did not build only for survival, but for connection, crafting machines of stone that reached toward the stars. The temples of Mesopotamia were not relics of superstition, but expressions of cosmic vision. They were the beating heart of civilization, the engines that aligned human life with the mysteries of the universe. And in their silent steps, one can still imagine the echo of hymns rising into the night sky. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings were not viewed as ordinary men elevated by power alone. Their authority was believed to flow from sacred blood, a lineage touched by the Anunnaki themselves. Dynasties were not merely families, they were vessels of divine legacy, threads that bound rulers to the stars. To claim the throne was to claim descent from heaven, a bond of blood that carried both privilege and burden. The idea of sacred bloodlines shaped the very structure of society. Kings declared themselves chosen by the gods, their right to rule, not born of conquest, but of ancestry. This belief gave their reigns a weight beyond politics, for they were seen as guardians of a cosmic order that stretched back to the dawn of creation. Their veins carried not just life, but destiny. Ceremonies of kingship reinforced this belief. Priests anointed rulers with sacred oils, clothed them in garments woven with symbols of the heavens, and crowned them with diadems glittering with gold and lapis. Each act proclaimed that the king was no ordinary man, but the living link between humanity and the divine. His very body was consecrated as an extension of celestial will. The myths themselves told of unions between gods and mortals, of moments when the Anunnaki mingled with humanity, leaving behind offspring who carried fragments of their essence. These children, half divine and half human, became the foundation of royal lines. To trace one's ancestry back to such unions was to hold proof of authority, evidence that the throne was not claimed by ambition, but inherited through the stars. Blood was not only a metaphor, but a substance of ritual. Sacrifices were offered with blood as the essence of life, binding men to gods. Kings, too, were bound by their blood, reminded in ceremonies that their lives belonged not to themselves, but to the Anunnaki, who had granted them their power. To reign was to carry the weight of a covenant written in flesh. The sacred bloodlines also carried danger. If a dynasty lost its divine favor, it was believed that the blood itself had grown impure, that the connection to the gods had weakened. Such moments were marked by rebellion, conquest, or natural disaster, signs that heaven had withdrawn its blessing. The fall of kings was never seen as chance, but as the breaking of a divine bond. In rituals of renewal, kings were reminded of this burden. They fasted, prayed, and submitted to ceremonies that symbolically stripped them of power, only to restore it again. These acts reaffirmed that their authority came not from men but from the Anunnaki, that their rule was a reflection of the eternal order. The idea of sacred bloodlines did not end with Sumer. It traveled through cultures and centuries. Egyptian pharaohs called themselves sons of Ra, claiming divine blood. Medieval kings spoke of the divine right of kings. Even in mythologies across the world, the idea of rulers descended from gods persists. All these echoes may trace back to the ancient conviction that kingship was not human invention but celestial inheritance. For the people, belief in sacred bloodlines brought reassurance. Their rulers were not merely ambitious men but chosen guardians, their reigns aligned with the will of the heavens. To serve such a king was to serve the order of the cosmos itself. Yet this belief also demanded loyalty that could not easily be questioned. To rebel against a king was to rebel against the Anunnaki, to stand against the very order of creation. Power, sanctified by blood, became unshakable, enduring until the gods themselves declared otherwise. Within palaces, dynasties guarded their lineage carefully. Marriages were arranged to preserve the purity of blood, alliances sealed to maintain divine favor. The royal family became not only political rulers but sacred vessels, their lives intertwined with destiny itself. The myths remind us that blood was never just life, it was legacy. It carried memory, power, and the authority of the stars. To spill royal blood was to break a cosmic bond, an act that reverberated beyond human judgment into the very realm of the divine. The sacred bloodlines stand as a testament to humanity's yearning for connection with the eternal. In the veins of kings, people imagined the pulse of the Anunnaki, a living reminder that the heavens had once walked among men. To speak of dynasties was to speak of threads woven not by chance but by cosmic design, and through these threads humanity believed itself bound forever to the rulers who came from the stars. The myths of Mesopotamia do not tell only of peace and order. They speak also of conflict, of rivalries that erupted not only among men but among the gods themselves. The Anunnaki, despite their power, were not united. Their struggles spilled into the world of mortals, shaping the fate of cities and empires. The wars of the gods were both cosmic and earthly, a drama of ambition, jealousy, and power written into the destiny of humankind. Enlil and Enki clashed over the fate of humanity, their rivalry reflected in floods and blessings, in judgment and mercy. Inanna, fierce and ambitious, sought dominion that brought her into conflict with others, her passion igniting battles that shook both heaven and earth. Even the lesser gods chose sides, their alliances shifting like the tides of war. Temples recorded these conflicts in hymns and myths, presenting them as lessons and warnings. When gods quarreled, men suffered. Storms ravaged fields, floods destroyed cities, and empires fell in fire. Yet in these struggles, people saw explanations for the chaos of life, for the wars that erupted between kingdoms, for the rise and fall of rulers. One myth speaks of battles fought in the skies, of fiery chariots clashing above the earth, their light streaking across the heavens like lightning. Another tells of wars fought through men, with gods standing behind kings, guiding their swords and shaping their victories. To fight for a city was to fight for the god who claimed it, and the battlefield became the stage of divine rivalry. Imagine the terror of a city under siege, its people praying not only to soldiers but to the gods who stood behind them. They believed their fate rested not in the strength of walls but in the favor of their divine patrons. Victory meant their god had triumphed. Defeat meant their god had turned away or been overcome. The wars of the gods were not always battles of destruction. They were also struggles of succession, of authority, of who would rule heaven and earth. Myths describe councils of the gods, debates that turned to quarrels, decrees that sparked rebellion. These divine conflicts mirrored the courts of kings, filled with ambition, betrayal, and shifting alliances. Even creation itself is sometimes framed as a result of divine war. The ordering of the cosmos was not peaceful, but born of struggle, chaos subdued by victory, rival gods defeated and cast down. The wars of the gods were not exceptions, but the very foundation of existence. For humanity, these stories carried meaning beyond myth. They explained why kingdoms rose and fell, why peace never lasted, why conflict was eternal. To live in a world shaped by the Anunnaki was to live in a world where even gods could not escape rivalry and strife. Priests taught that these wars were lessons, reflections of the balance between order and chaos. Just as men quarreled, so too did gods. Just as cities fought, so too did heavens. The microcosm reflected the macrocosm, and the struggles of men became echoes of battles written into the stars. In rituals, offerings were made to appease warring gods, to seek peace between them, to protect cities from being caught in the crossfire of divine anger. Hymns begged the Anunnaki to remember their children, to spare humanity from the fury of their disputes. Yet the stories remind us that mortals were always vulnerable, their lives woven into the fabric of divine conflict. The wars of the gods also revealed the fragility of power. No ruler, no temple, no god was beyond challenge. Even the mighty Anunnaki faced rivals, their authority contested, their victories never absolute. This truth carried into human kingdoms, where dynasties fell as easily as they rose, reflecting the eternal struggle above. Legends suggest that these conflicts left scars upon the world itself. Mountains split, rivers diverted, cities turned to ruins. Whether literal or symbolic, such stories speak of the immense impact of divine rivalry, shaping not only myth but geography, not only faith but memory. The wars of the gods remind us that divinity was never simple. The Anunnaki were not perfect, not unified, but bound by the same passions and ambitions that move humanity. In their struggles, men saw their own reflection magnified to cosmic scale. Among the ruins of Uruk, one name lingers louder than any other: Gilgamesh. Half man, half divine, his story has survived in fragments of clay pieced together into the oldest epic known to humankind. His tale is not only of a king, but of the eternal struggle against time, against death, against the limits placed upon every living being. Through Gilgamesh, the memory of the Anunnaki continued, woven into a journey that still speaks to hearts today. Gilgamesh was said to be 2/3 god and 1/3 man, a ruler of unmatched strength and ambition. His reign over Uruk was both admired and feared. He built walls so vast they seemed to challenge the horizon, temples that touched the heavens, and monuments that carried his name across the ages. Yet for all his greatness, he was restless, driven by a longing that power alone could never satisfy. The epic begins with his friendship with Enkidu, a wild man shaped by the gods to rival Gilgamesh. At first they clashed, two forces locked in battle, yet their conflict gave way to a bond deeper than brotherhood. Together they became companions, their adventures carrying them across forests, mountains and rivers. The friendship of Gilgamesh and Enkidu became the foundation of the epic, a reminder that even kings need companions, that greatness is not found in solitude. Their journey led them to confront Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest. With courage and might, they defeated the giant, cutting down the sacred trees. Yet this act of defiance against the divine order carried consequences, for the gods do not grant victories without cost. In their triumph lay the seeds of tragedy. When Inanna, radiant goddess of love and war, offered herself to Gilgamesh, he spurned her, fearing the fate of her previous lovers. Angered, she sent the bull of heaven to punish him. Once again, Gilgamesh and Enkidu stood together, slaying the celestial beast. Their victory echoed through Uruk, yet the gods decreed that such defiance could not go unpunished. Enkidu fell ill, struck down by divine will. His slow decline filled the epic with grief, his death breaking the heart of Gilgamesh. For the first time, the great king felt the full weight of mortality, the terror of loss, the inevitability of death. His cries echoed through Uruk, his sorrow transforming his ambition into desperate yearning for answers. From that moment, Gilgamesh sought immortality. He journeyed far through deserts and across seas, into lands where no mortal dared tread. He sought Utnapishtim, survivor of the Great Flood, who had been granted eternal life by the gods. His quest was not for power, but for freedom from the shadow of death that had taken his friend. The journey was filled with visions and trials. He passed through gates of darkness, walked along the path of the sun, and crossed the waters of death. Each step brought him closer to truth, yet also to the realization that immortality was not a gift easily given. When Gilgamesh finally found Utnapishtim, the ancient sage told him the story of the flood, of the gods' decision to erase mankind, of the survival that changed destiny. He revealed that immortality was not meant for all, that life's true meaning lay in what one builds, in the legacy left behind. Though Gilgamesh was offered a chance to grasp a plant of eternal youth, it was stolen by a serpent, leaving him with nothing but wisdom. The king returned to Uruk empty-handed yet transformed. He looked upon the walls he had built, the temples he had raised, the city he had shaped, and realized that his legacy was not in living forever, but in the memory carried forward by his people. His story became eternal, even if his body could not. The epic of Gilgamesh is more than legend. It is the human story of longing, of grief, of seeking what lies beyond. It reminds us that even kings, even those with divine blood, cannot escape death. Yet through their deeds, their names, their stories, they achieve a kind of immortality greater than flesh. For the Sumerians, Gilgamesh embodied the paradox of humanity, shaped by gods, yet bound by mortality. His tale was carved into clay, preserved across millennia, ensuring that his voice would never fade. Even today, when we read his words, when we speak his name, we continue the legacy he sought to preserve. The legacy of Gilgamesh lies not in conquering death, but in teaching us to face it. His journey remains a mirror, reflecting our own struggles with time, with loss, with the desire to leave something behind. And through him, the memory of the Anunnaki lives on, woven into the oldest story humanity has ever told. Long after the Anunnaki descended, their presence was believed to linger not only in temples and myths, but in the stars themselves. The heavens were seen as living texts, messages written in light, signs that revealed the will of the gods. Watching these signs became a sacred duty, entrusted to priests and astronomers who spent their nights gazing into the vast expanse above. These were the watchers of the skies. In quiet chambers atop ziggurats, priests stood beneath the night sky, their eyes fixed upon constellations. Every movement of the moon, every shimmer of the planets, every shadow cast by eclipses was recorded and interpreted. The heavens were a scroll, and they believed the Anunnaki had written upon it, guiding mankind through celestial signs. The watchers marked the passage of Venus, the star of Inanna, whose brilliant rise and disappearance mirrored the goddess's descent into the underworld and her radiant return. They traced the paths of the sun and moon, mapping the cycles that govern planting, harvest, and ritual. To them, the stars were not distant, but alive, each one a messenger of divine will. Observatories were more than scientific spaces. They were sacred. Priests purified themselves before watching the skies, offering incense and prayers, preparing their spirits to receive messages from the heavens. To misinterpret a sign was to risk the wrath of the gods, for each omen carried weight, each alignment of stars shaped destiny. The watchers believed that the Anunnaki had taught them these secrets, gifting humanity with the knowledge of the skies. Their skills were not merely learned but inherited, part of a tradition that stretched back to the first kings, the first temples, the first whispers from heaven. Records carved into clay reveal a meticulous devotion, eclipses noted with precision, conjunctions of planets observed, comets described as fiery swords across the heavens. Each observation was paired with interpretation. The rise of a star might mean the birth of a king, the fall of another, the death of a dynasty. The cosmos was both calendar and prophecy. For the common people, the watchers were intermediaries, their words carrying the authority of gods. When priests declared that the heavens favored war, armies marched. When they warned of famine, preparations began. Life and death were shaped by the readings of the stars. Yet the watchers did not only serve kings, They also guided farmers, teaching them when to plant and when to harvest, aligning human labor with cosmic order. Their wisdom wove together the practical and the spiritual, binding survival itself to the rhythm of the skies. The stars also carried mysteries too vast to explain. Some tablets describe constellations that seem to map not only what is visible, but knowledge of distant planets and cycles beyond naked sight. Scholars still puzzle over these records, wondering if they preserve fragments of knowledge granted by the Anunnaki themselves. For the Watchers, the night sky was alive with memory. Each star was a reminder of the gods who had descended, each constellation a story written across the heavens. To gaze upward was to look not only at light, but at history, at messages carried from eternity. Their role was both privilege and burden. The Watchers carried secrets too dangerous for all to know, truths that could not be shared freely. They lived in silence, their wisdom preserved in symbols few could understand. Yet through their devotion, civilization was guided, anchored to the stars above. Even today, when we gaze at constellations, when we mark the passage of planets, we echo their work. The Watchers of the Skies began a tradition that continues still, the belief that the heavens speak, that the stars are more than fire, that in their light lies meaning. Their legacy is carved not only into clay, but into human memory itself. We continue to look upward, searching for signs, for stories, for messages beyond ourselves. And in that act, we remain connected to the ancient priests who stood atop ziggurats, whispering prayers to the stars. For centuries, the Anunnaki were remembered as rulers, teachers, and gods who walked among men. Yet at some point, their presence faded. Temples once filled with fire and song grew silent, statues stood empty, and cities carried on without the visible presence of their celestial lords. The vanishing of the Anunnaki remains one of the great mysteries of ancient memory, a silence that still haunts the ruins of Sumer. Myths do not agree on how they departed. Some say they returned to their distant home among the stars, leaving behind the civilizations they had shaped. Others whisper that they withdrew into hidden realms, invisible yet still watching. Still others claim they never truly left, but dissolved into the myths, their presence absorbed into the fabric of human culture. For the people, the absence was profound. Once the gods were near, their voices heard in storms, their judgments felt in floods, their presence seen in rituals. Then gradually that nearness faded, replaced by memory, by echoes carved into stone and sung in hymns. Humanity was left to walk its path with only fragments of guidance. Temples still stood, priests still chanted, but the rituals carried a hollow echo. The gods no longer descended openly, no longer revealed themselves with fire and light. Kings still claimed divine favor, yet the certainty of that bond weakened. The connection between heaven and earth grew distant, a thread stretched thin. Some myths suggest that the Anunnaki left because humanity had grown restless, too ambitious, too aware of forbidden knowledge. Perhaps the gods feared what men might become, choosing to withdraw before their creations rose beyond their control. Others suggest that humanity was abandoned as punishment, left to struggle without divine guidance. The vanishing also carried sorrow. Hymns turned from songs of praise to laments, voices crying out for absent gods. Clay tablets record prayers unanswered, pleas for the Anunnaki to return, for the presence that once filled the world with awe. The silence was not peace, but longing, a gap that could not be filled. Yet the Anunnaki did not vanish entirely. Their names endured, their stories echoed, their influence lingered in every corner of culture. They may have left the temples, but they lived on in myth, in memory, in the very structure of kingship and law. In this way they became eternal, not as rulers of flesh, but but as rulers of imagination. Cities rose and fell after their departure, empires replaced by new empires, yet each one carried traces of their legacy. Babylon spoke of gods descended from heaven. Later faiths reimagined them as angels, demons, or distant creators. The Anunnaki had vanished, yet their presence never truly ended. For the ancients, the silence of the gods was a question without answer. Were they watching still, hidden behind the stars? Would they one day return? Or had they abandoned mankind forever? These questions lingered like shadows across centuries, haunting rituals and myths alike. The vanishing of the Anunnaki did not erase their power. If anything, it deepened it. Absence gave rise to longing, and longing gave rise to stories. The less they were seen, the more they were remembered, their mystery growing greater with every generation that passed without their return. Even now their silence stirs curiosity. Some believe they departed to another realm, others that they never existed at all. Yet the myths suggest something deeper. That their presence was never meant to last forever, that their vanishing was part of the cycle of creation, leaving humanity to walk alone, carrying only the memory of gods who once dwelled among them. The ruins of Mesopotamia still whisper their absence. Empty temples, broken statues, fragments of hymns, all stand as reminders of a presence lost, a silence too vast to fill. Yet in that silence lies power, the power of mystery, the power of stories that never fade. The vanishing of the Anunnaki remains unresolved, a question left open across millennia. Perhaps they are gone forever, or perhaps they wait, beyond the stars, for the moment to descend again. Until then, they live in the silence they left behind, a silence that still echoes across the sands of time. When the memory of the Anunnaki began to fade from temples and clay tablets, their essence did not vanish entirely. Instead, it rippled outward, finding new forms in the myths of later cultures. From Babylon to Greece, from Egypt to the sacred texts of Israel, echoes of the ancient sky kings appear under different names, reshaped to fit new traditions, but carrying the same unmistakable resonance. In Babylon, the Anunnaki transformed into a broader pantheon, their stories adapted, their roles reshaped. Enlil became associated with Marduk, the god who slayed chaos and built order from the void. Enki's wisdom lived on in Ea, the god of the waters, who guided men through secret knowledge. The legacy of Inanna endured in Ishtar, radiant goddess of both desire and war, her hymns carrying the same duality of love and destruction. The Egyptians too carried similar echoes. Their gods were rulers of heaven and earth, descended from realms beyond, granting kingship to pharaohs who claimed descent from the sun. Temples rose like stairways to the skies, rituals bound life to celestial rhythms, and the divine was seen not only in spirit but in flesh. Though their names differed, the shape of the belief was familiar, as if drawn from the same forgotten source. In Greece, the Olympians ruled from above, bound by rivalries and dramas that mirrored those of the Anunnaki. Zeus, stern lord of the skies, carries the echo of Enlil's authority. Poseidon, master of waters, reflects Enki's domain. Aphrodite, born of sea foam, bears the brilliance and passion of Inanna. Though separated by centuries, the parallels shimmer like stars across cultures. Even in the sacred texts of Israel, faint reflections linger. Angels descending from heaven, giants born of their unions with mortals, and the wrath of a god who once sent a flood to cleanse the earth, all mirror stories first told in Sumer. These echoes suggest not mere coincidence, but memory transformed, stories reshaped to serve new faiths while still carrying ancient truths. The persistence of these themes reveals humanity's enduring fascination with beings who came from the heavens, who ruled with power, who mingled with men. Whether called Anunnaki, gods, angels, or watchers, they embody the same archetype: rulers from above who shaped human destiny. Stories migrate with people, carried across deserts, rivers, and seas. Traders, exiles, conquerors, all bore fragments of memory that blended with new traditions. Myths evolved like rivers branching into countless streams, yet their source lay in the fertile soil of Mesopotamia, where the Anunnaki first stepped into human imagination. The echoes also remind us of the fragility of memory. Names change, temples crumble, but ideas endure. The Anunnaki lived on not as they were, but as they were remembered, transformed through time into new shapes that still carried their essence. For the ancients, these transformations were not erasure, but continuation. To honor Marduk was to echo Enlil. To worship Ishtar was to carry Inanna's flame. To speak of angels descending was to recall the sky kings who once walked the earth. The myths lived on because they were too profound to die. The echoes reveal something deeper, that humanity cannot let go of the idea that we are not alone, that our origins are bound to powers beyond the earth. Whether in temples, scriptures, or stories by the fire, we continue to whisper of beings who came from above, who gave us kingship, knowledge, and destiny. Even now, when we speak of gods, angels, or celestial visitors, we carry the same memory in new words. The Anunnaki remain with us, hidden in the myths we tell, the traditions we inherit, the stories we cannot release. These echoes are not fragments of a forgotten past, but living threads weaving through cultures, binding us to the first civilizations, reminding us that the memory of the Sky Kings never truly faded. It only changed form, waiting to be recognized once more. Scattered among the ruins of Mesopotamia are carvings that reveal more than simple symbols. Some seem to show entire star systems, planets, and cosmic alignments etched into stone. These mysterious images raise questions that still stir the imagination. How could the ancients have known of celestial bodies invisible to the naked eye? Did they inherit knowledge from the Anunnaki, who brought with them wisdom of the heavens? One tablet, long studied and debated, depicts what appears to be a sun surrounded by planets. Some see in it a map of our solar system, complete with orbits too precise to be accident. Another carving shows constellations aligned with sacred temples, as though the very architecture of cities was planned according to patterns of the sky. These fragments suggest not simple art, but records of knowledge far beyond the means of early mankind. The ancients believed the stars were messages written by the gods for those who could read them. To carve their images into stone was to preserve that message for eternity, to ensure that the wisdom of the heavens would not be lost. The star maps became both sacred and practical, guiding rituals, calendars, and even the rise and fall of kings. Priests studied these patterns with devotion, aligning their temples with solstices, building ziggurats that mirrored constellations. Each stone laid in place was part of a greater design, a cosmic architecture meant to reflect the heavens on earth. To walk through a city was to walk through a star map, every street and temple aligned with forces beyond human reach. The knowledge preserved in these carvings carries mysteries still unexplained. How did the Sumerians know of the complex movements of planets? Why did they speak of celestial bodies that would not be confirmed until modern times? Some suggest they observed with remarkable precision, others that they were taught by beings who carried knowledge from beyond. The idea of a star map reaches beyond Sumer. In Egypt, temples aligned with Sirius, marking the flooding of the Nile. In Britain, Stonehenge stood as a calendar of solstices. In the Andes, lines carved into the earth pointed toward constellations. Across the world, the same impulse appears, to mirror the heavens upon the earth, to carve the sky into stone. These parallels raise the question of shared memory. Could all these cultures, separated by oceans, have inherited fragments of the same teaching? Were the Anunnaki not only rulers of Sumer, but teachers of the world, leaving behind knowledge written in stars and stone? The star maps remind us that ancient peoples saw the cosmos not as distant, but as intimate. The heavens were woven into their lives, their cities, their very sense of order. To understand the stars was to understand the will of the gods, to align oneself with the eternal rhythm of creation. Imagine a priest standing atop a ziggurat, tracing the arc of Venus across the dawn sky, then carving its path into stone for generations to remember. To him, this was not science alone, but devotion, a way of capturing the voice of the gods before it faded. The star maps endure because they are not just records, but mysteries. They hint at knowledge that should not have been possible, at wisdom carried from sources unknown. Each symbol carved into stone is a question, a whisper from the past, asking how much the ancients truly knew. Even today, we study the skies, mapping stars, tracing galaxies. In this, we echo the same impulse as the Sumerians, the same longing to understand the heavens. Their star maps remind us that the quest for cosmic knowledge is as old as civilization itself. The carvings remain silent, yet they speak to us still. They suggest that the story of humanity is not bound to Earth alone, that our ancestors may have known more than we dare to imagine, that the Anunnaki left behind not only myths, but maps. Not all knowledge is preserved. Much of what was once known has been lost, buried beneath conquest, time, and deliberate silence. The story of the Anunnaki carries with it the shadow of erasure, as though truths too heavy for humanity were hidden away, leaving only fragments to survive. The ruins of Mesopotamia stand not only as monuments, but as tombs of forgotten wisdom. Libraries once filled with thousands of clay tablets now lie in shards, their knowledge broken and scattered. Fires consumed temples, floods carried away archives, and conquerors shattered what they did not understand. Each loss was more than material. It was the silencing of voices, the erasure of truths that once guided civilizations. Some myths suggest that this forgetting was no accident. They whisper that the Anunnaki themselves willed certain knowledge to fade, truths too dangerous for humanity to carry forward. Forbidden secrets were sealed, hidden in symbols, buried in places where only the worthy might find them. The curse of forgotten truth is felt in the gaps of history. Why do we know so little of certain reigns? Why do some myths survive while others vanish entirely? What knowledge lies in tablets yet to be unearthed, in fragments still waiting beneath the sands? The silences of history may hold as much meaning as its records. Priests may have guarded these truths, passing them only to chosen initiates, cloaking them in rituals and symbols that concealed more than they revealed. Knowledge became a treasure too dangerous for all to hold, a flame hidden in darkness, preserved only for the few. For the common people, the loss was absolute. They inherited fragments, stories of floods, kings, and gods, but not the deeper meanings that once gave them shape. Myths became incomplete, stripped of context, shadows of truths that once glowed brightly. Conquerors, too, played their part. New rulers sought to erase the memory of old gods, to silence the voices of the Anunnaki in favor of their own. Temples were torn down, tablets smashed, names rewritten. Each act of destruction was also an act of rewriting, burying the old beneath the new. Yet fragments survived, carried in whispers, in songs, in echoes across cultures. Even when libraries burned, memory lingered. The flood story survived in countless retellings. The names of Inanna, Enlil, and Enki persisted in altered forms. The truths were forgotten but not entirely erased. The curse of forgotten truth leaves us with mystery. We stand among ruins, piecing together fragments, never certain if what we reconstruct is whole. We sense the presence of something greater, yet it remains just beyond reach, like a dream fading with the dawn. Perhaps the forgetting was necessary. Some truths may carry dangers too great, burdens too heavy. Perhaps the Anunnaki knew that humanity was not yet ready to bear the full weight of their legacy. The silence itself may have been their final gift, a protection hidden within loss. Yet the longing remained. Each tablet discovered, each fragment translated feels like a step toward recovering what was lost. Each whisper from the past stirs the imagination, reminding us that history is not only what we know, but what we do not. The curse of forgotten truth is not only a wound, but a challenge. It invites us to seek, to question, to remember. It ensures that the story of the Anunnaki will never be closed, for as long as there are mysteries left, their presence lingers in the silence. Across cultures and centuries, myths speak of a time when the gods will return. The Anunnaki, who once descended from the heavens and later vanished, are said to hold a promise that they will walk among men again. This hope and fear has never faded, carried in prophecies, in visions, in whispers beneath the stars. The Sumerians spoke of cycles, of ages that rise and fall, of thrones that pass from earth to heaven and back again. If kingship descended once, might it not descend once more? The belief lingered that the gods had not abandoned the world forever, but only withdrawn, watching until the moment of return. In Babylonian prophecies, the promise of divine return was tied to renewal, to the restoration of cosmic order after chaos. In later traditions, the return of gods became the coming of messiahs, of saviors, of divine kings who would restore justice. The form changed, but the essence remained, the hope of a second descent. For some, the return was a vision of hope. They imagined gods descending with light, bringing wisdom, ending suffering, guiding humanity into a new age. For others, it was a vision of terror, of judgment, of wrath, returning to cleanse the world once again. The return could be blessing or curse, salvation or doom. Priests gazed at the skies, watching for signs of the return. A comet blazing across the heavens, an eclipse turning day into night, a star appearing where none had been before. Each was studied, each was considered a possible herald of the gods' approach. The heavens were read not only for patterns of seasons, but for promises of destiny. In temples, rituals reenacted the descent, as if preparing for the moment when it would happen again. Hymns called upon the Anunnaki to return, sacrifices were offered to invite their presence, and prayers rose into the night, asking for the stairways between heaven and earth to open once more. The idea of return spread beyond Mesopotamia. In Christianity, Christ was said to descend again in glory. In Hinduism, Vishnu was believed to come in avatars, returning to restore balance. In Mesoamerican prophecy, Quetzalcoatl was said to one day reappear. The echoes are endless, as if the memory of divine return was embedded in the human spirit. Even in modern times, the hope lingers in new forms. Stories of celestial visitors, of beings from distant stars who may one day come again, carry the same essence as the ancient promise. We look to the sky with the same longing, the same mixture of hope and dread. The return of the gods is not only about the future, but about the present. It shapes how people live, urging them to prepare, to purify, to align themselves with the order of the heavens. The belief is both a comfort and a warning, a reminder that humanity does not walk alone. The silence of the Anunnaki is filled with expectation. If they came once, why not again? If they shaped humanity, might they not return to see what has become of their creation? The questions linger, unanswered yet powerful, drawing eyes upward even now. To imagine their return is to confront both possibility and fear. Would they come as teachers, sharing knowledge once withheld, or as rulers, demanding obedience, or as judges, bringing a flood of fire instead of water? The uncertainty is part of the mystery, the weight of a promise that can never be fully understood. The myths remind us that history is cyclical, that what was may be again. The Anunnaki walked among men once, and their absence may not be eternal. Their return remains a possibility whispered in every culture, a promise carved into memory itself. The ruins of Sumer lie beneath shifting sands, their temples silent, their kings forgotten by time. Yet the story of the Anunnaki still breathes, carried not only by clay tablets, but by the imagination of those who wonder about the mysteries of our past. Their names echo across centuries, their tales ripple through cultures, and their legacy lingers in the stars that once guided them. The Anunnaki were remembered as rulers from the heavens, as teachers who gave mankind the gifts of writing, farming, and law. They were remembered as judges who brought the flood, as rivals whose quarrels shaped the destiny of empires, as creators who molded mankind from clay and divine essence. They were many things at once, and perhaps that is why their memory has endured, because they embodied the eternal contradictions of existence itself. Through the myths of Enlil and Enki, we see the struggle between law and mercy. Through the brilliance of Inanna, we see the cycles of love and war, creation and destruction. Through Gilgamesh, we see the human yearning for immortality, the grief of loss, the search for meaning. In every story, the gods of Sumer held up a mirror to humanity, showing us not only who they were, but who we are. Even as their temples fell into ruin, their presence lived on in later traditions. In Babylon, in Greece, in Egypt, in the scriptures of distant lands, their shadows reappeared under new names, their essence reshaped but never destroyed. The Anunnaki became eternal, not by walking among us forever, but by becoming part of the stories we cannot forget. Their memory endures because it is bound to the questions we still ask. Where did we come from? Who shaped our world? Are we alone, or part of something greater than we know? These questions are as old as civilization, and they will live as long as humanity looks to the sky. The Anunnaki may have vanished, but their silence has not erased them. Instead, it has deepened their mystery, transforming them into eternal figures who live not in flesh but in story, not in temples but in imagination. Their tale is not finished because it was never meant to finish. It is a story that renews itself each time a star is watched, each time a myth is retold, each time a seeker listens for whispers in the silence of the night. The story of the Anunnaki is not a closed book but an endless hymn. It is sung in fragments, whispered in ruins, remembered in stars. It flows like the rivers of Mesopotamia, always moving, always changing, never fading. And so the journey closes not with an ending, but with a return to silence. The same silence that fills the desert where their temples once stood, the same silence that covers the night sky where their thrones may still gleam. The story waits there, waiting to be told again, waiting to be carried forward by new voices, waiting to awaken once more. If you have journeyed with us through the mysteries of the Anunnaki, through the whispers of forgotten myths and the echoes of ancient kings, I invite you to stay connected with this channel. Subscribe to keep exploring stories of the past that still shape our dreams. If this film has moved you, please give it a like. It helps more seekers find their way here. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Every question, every idea, every reflection adds to the conversation. And if this story touched you, share it with your family and friends so that together we may keep the flame of memory alive, passing it from voice to voice, from heart to heart. The story of the Anunnaki never truly ends, and neither does our search for meaning in the mysteries of the stars.